Hi, my name is Scarlett and I run a small business called AFRAYED Upcycling. I take secondhand textiles and make unique clothing and accessories. And today I am so excited because I'll be doing a sew along video for this jumpsuit, which is my own pattern, and it's called the Beryl Jumpsuit. A little backstory to this jumpsuit because it's so special to me. So back in 2020, me and my partner were forced to come back from traveling because of COVID. After not sewing for 5 to 6 months, I was just so desperate to get on my sewing machine. So I went to go buy fabric and there was a 4 to 6 week delay on fabrics. So my mum kindly offered to give me some of her clothing which I could cut up and use as fabric as an alternative. And that's how the first patchwork jumpsuit was born. I posted it on a bunch of Facebook upcycling groups and it did really well, and pretty much the rest is history. It is wild to me that 4 years later, I not only do this as a full-time thing, but I also upcycle clothing and secondhand textiles every day. And this is finally becoming a pattern that people can use. So yeah, I am just so happy and excited about this. So for this video, I will be making a patchwork version of the Beryl jumpsuit, and along the way I'll give you some tips and techniques that I use in my everyday order making. And yeah, so let's just get on with the video, and hopefully this will really help. If you're more of a visual learner, this will definitely be a video for you. So let's just do it. This is the Beryl jumpsuit. It features a V neckline. It has slightly balloon-shaped legs, pockets which are hidden in the seams at the side, 5 buttons which are at the front of the jumpsuit. It has book sleeves, and overall it's just a loose, oversized fit. Along with fabric, you are going to need some medium weight interfacing. You will also need 5 22mm wide buttons. When I go to make a patchwork jumpsuit for an order, for example, I do have a few rules on where I place materials. And I'll be super honest and maybe slightly controversial, but I really do think you can stitch any kind of materials together. So in my patchwork, I do have some upholstery materials, and then I'll have some lightweight cottons, maybe some with a tiny bit of stretch. And I do think you can sew all of these together. They just need to be placed in the right area of a jumpsuit. So for example, I will always put the more thick or sturdier material towards the very top of the garment by the shoulders. This really helps to keep the structure of the jumpsuit. And same with any stretch fabrics, they need to be towards the bottom of the jumpsuit. Another rule that I have for myself, but you don't necessarily need to follow, is that when it comes to placing the buttonholes on the jumpsuit, I find that by having just one fabric rather than lots of seams to go through, it's a lot easier for me to put under my machine. So again, this is something you will see in pretty much all of my jumpsuits that I make, is I'll always have a piece, just one piece of fabric, whether that's a tea towel or just some cotton, just some sturdy material that is just there. And it just means it's a lot easier to put under my machine. My last tip is that if you really want to show the shape of the legs, because they are slightly curved, slightly balloon shaped, now I would definitely put your more sturdy materials towards the outer seams of the jumpsuit. So I've tried different ways of patchworking my garments, and this way works really well for me. It's quick, it's easy, and it has a nice finish. So what I typically do is I stitch the pieces together one at a time, and then I stitch it, and then I finish the edge with my overlocker. And I do this individually. I would do these 3 pieces, so again, stitch, stitch, overlock, overlock, and then attach this piece. It just creates a really nice sharp finish when I go to put it under the iron. There are other ways to do patchwork, so if you're in a bit of a hurry, you could always literally just overlock the edges, the seams together. The only thing with this is that when you put it under an iron, it does reveal some of the overlocker stitches, as you can see here. And I don't know, it just really annoyed me when that happened. And it's just not as you can see, like just doing that, they start to pull a bit. So again, I probably would only use this option if you are in a bit of a rush. Another way, which is probably one of the longer ways, but also the neater ways, is sewing the pieces together, then top stitching them down like that. And as you can see, this is a very clean looking piece, and it would work really well with maybe denim and having like contrasting stitching. So that is also another option, especially if you don't have a overlocker. It just helps keep every piece flat rather than this touching your skin. But for this one, I am just doing my normal technique, which is overlocking and stitching. Fuse your interfacing onto the wrong side of the back facing and the front facings. Stitch 2 mm away from the curved necklines on the front and back pieces. If possible, finish the edges of the front and back pieces. You can use this video as a guide to show what sides need to be finished. If you have used an overlocker to finish the edges of your pieces, the notches may be hard to find. Therefore, it might be wise to get a fabric marker or chalk and transfer the notches this way instead. Finish the pocket bag pieces also. Using the notches on the pattern, place a pocket bag piece along the side seam, right sides together. Pin or clip in place and stitch with a 5 mm seam allowance. Press the seam allowance towards the pocket, then from the right side understitch by stitching close to the seam, catching the seam allowance underneath. Repeat this step for all pocket bags, and it should look a little like this. With right sides together, place the two back pattern pieces on top of each other. Pin and stitch the long seam that starts at the neck, then ends at the crotch. Sew the shoulder seams of the front and back pieces and press the seams open. With right sides together, sew the shoulder seams of the front and back neck facings. If using an overlocker to finish the seams of your neck facing, finish both ends of the facing with extra thread. Take an embroidery needle and thread the ends, then pull the thread through some of the overlocker stitches on the back of the facing and snip the length. This should provide a very neat finish to your facing. With right sides together, pin the neck facing to the neck edge of the front pieces. Make sure to align them along the edge with the shoulder seams and pointed edges matching. Grab a fabric marker and mark the two dots that are on the facing. Using the dots that are marked on the facing, start by stitching a line that is 5 mm from the edge from the end of the facing to the very first dot. Finish this line of stitching with a backstitch. Then start your stitching at the second dot and continue to stitch the entire neckline, pivoting at corners. Finish this line of stitching at the other dot, backstitch, then create a new line of stitching 5mm away like you did at the start of this step. Your facing should look like this once it's been stitched on. Carefully cut at an angle towards the dot, making sure not to cut through the seams. You will need to trim the pointed corners on the facing. Carefully cut notches into the seam allowance around the back neckline and the curved front neckline. This will help the seam sit flat and stay tucked into your garment. We now need to press the seams. In order to get a really crisp finish, what I like to do is to first press the seam allowance open, and then I press it again with the seam allowance towards the neck facing. In order to keep the facing on the inside of the garment, we will need to do some understitching. You will need to stitch about 2mm away from the edge of the seam on the facing side. Make sure that you catch all of the seam allowance underneath. Start and finish the understitching at the points on the facing. Use the pictures in the instructions or this video as reference. As you can see here, the stitching has caught the seam allowance only. I would give that one final press. Now, in order to secure the neck facing in place, we will need to stitch in the ditch at the shoulder seams. Sew from the neckline to the end of the facing. This can be done by hand or by machine. If you are not planning to add a label to your garment, it is recommended to add a few stitches at the back of the garment on the back neck facing to help keep the facing in place. With the front pieces right sides facing each other, pin and stitch the crotch curve only. Start as close as you can to the dot, making sure you don't catch the facing within the seam. Press the seam open or towards the side. Now, turn the piece so that right sides are facing up. Take the front right piece and overlap it onto the left piece until it is even. This is where your buttonholes and buttons are going to be. Towards the bottom, secure it in place with a line of stitching about 3mm away from the edge. Sew between both points, making sure all layers are sewn through. The other side should look a little like this once it's been sewn. Start to pin the side seams of the front and back pieces, making sure that the pockets are aligned. With a 1 centimeter seam allowance, sew down the side seam, pivot at the pocket bag, sew around the curved edge of the pocket bag, pivot again and stitch down towards the hem of the garment. To ensure you keep to the 1 centimeter line when it comes to pivoting at the pocket bag, make a mark with a fabric marker. With right sides facing each other, pin the front and back inner leg seams. It is recommended to start at the crotch and outwards towards both hems. Stitch in place and finish the seams. Take your jumpsuit to the ironing board and press open the seams of both legs and the inner legs also. To hem the jumpsuit, turn the fabric to the wrong side by 1 centimeter and press. Then fold the fabric again by 2 centimeters, press, pin, and then stitch it into place. This nifty little silicone hemmer is a product by Generate by Jen Hogg, and I will link it in the description below. Grab your 2 sleeve pieces and fold them and sew along the shorter edge of both sleeves right sides together. Press both the seams open flat, then fold the sleeves in half so that the long sides meet with the wrong sides touching. To make it easier, machine tack the raw edges together. With the jumpsuit wrong sides out, pin the raw edges of the sleeve to the sleeve opening, matching the underarm seam to the side seam of the jumpsuit. Finish the seam allowance and press towards the sleeve. To help you pin the sleeve in place, pin the underarm seam up until halfway on the armhole on both sides, then gently stretch to allow easy pinning. You will now need to mark out your buttonholes. You can do this by either using the buttonhole guide on the pattern, or using a buttonhole spacer ruler, or even just using a normal ruler to evenly space out your buttons. Make sure to mark your buttonholes onto the front right piece. Center the buttonholes so that the buttons, once sewn on, do not hang over the edge of the front. You'll then need to cut the buttonholes and use these to mark your button placement. As a little tip, I use anti-fray glue to help keep the buttonholes quite sturdy and stops any of that fraying. Add your buttons either by machine or by hand. If you want to make your jumpsuit extra special, why not sew in a hand-stamped label made from scraps? I use this VersaCraft fabric ink for mine. All you have to do is stamp it and then heat set it for 15 seconds. Then finally give your jumpsuit one final press and you have made the coolest jumpsuit ever. Thank you so much for watching this video. I would absolutely love to see what you make using this pattern. So please do tag me on Instagram or TikTok, and the social media handle is @AFRAYED Upcycling. If you would like to buy the pattern, it is on my website, which is afrayedupcycling.co.uk.